Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second session of panel 7 of the Cassandra Conference, Data to Action and Knowledge to Effect. I hope that most of you were able to listen into the first part of this session, where we had 4 speakers already talking about their work across the value chain of data to information to knowledge to action, and sharing their experiences on their work in that field. If you're just joined new, then welcome again, and we hope you'll find this discussion interesting and helpful. While we focused already on sort of the entire value chain from data to action, and the second session is emphasizing on the work from or the aspects on from knowledge to effect, and really how do we drive action on the ground, including all levels of governance and stakeholders, with the available information and science and research, and the role of research in all of this. We have, again, a chat function. Please do include your questions at any point. No question is silly. We are happy to take all questions from the floor. And otherwise, it will just be a chat between the 4 of us. We are currently, unfortunately, still missing one of our panelists, who we hope will join us in a few minutes. Before we go ahead to see the opening statements from our panelists, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome the 4 of them. Hopefully it will be 4 at the end. And we start off with Brian Spears, who is a principal research scientist at Freshwater Ecology at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. And Brian has a degree in environmental sciences and a master's in biological sciences and a PhD in limnology, and more than 20 years of experience studying the impacts of human activity on freshwater ecosystems. Also really having a very good background on lakes particularly. And central to all his work is producing evidence from monitoring data to inform on-the-ground action, which directly links to this topic of this session. Then we will have Ruth Spencer, who is the chair of the Marine Ecosystems Protection Areas. And Ruth has a master's in international development economics and has committed her career to bringing about social, economic, and environmental development that is people-centered. She is particularly keen to include local communities in environmental decision-making processes through adequate access to information and opportunities for inclusion and participation in these processes. Then we have Caral Plana, who is a researcher in water, air, and in the Water, Air, and Soil Unit at EuroCut. And she holds a degree in chemical engineering and a master's in environmental engineering, and one in water engineering, as well as a PhD in water engineering. She has dedicated her work to the online monitoring and modeling of wastewater treatment plants and rivers, and the analysis of long data series. Last but not least, we have Sylvia Frias, who's a climate change researcher in the Climate Change Research Department of the Sustainability Area at EuroCut. And she has a degree in human biology and a master's in oceanography and marine environmental management. Her current work focuses on coastal ecosystem restoration and mitigation and adaptation to climate change. Right, so those will be our 4 panelists today. And I'm now requesting that we start their intro statements via video. Thank you very much.
Did you know that there are an estimated 117 million lakes visible from remote sensing? Many lakes are either refugia for rare species or evolutionary treasure chests. Lakes provide essential ecosystem services for billions of people, with an estimated net value of over $3 trillion. Despite their immense value, lakes are often subject to extreme pressures from pollution, habitat destruction, overfishing, and invasion by alien species. The World Water Quality Alliance was set up as a response to the multiple pressures and opportunities for sustainable use of inland waters. The ecosystems workstream of the WWQA has been working to raise the awareness of the importance of lakes, with an important first step in producing a position paper on embedding lakes into the global sustainability agenda. This was launched at the UN Water Conference in New York in March 2023, and in August with a follow-up webinar hosted by the Society of Ecological Restoration and a talk show session at Stockholm World Water Week. The position paper is also a response to the needs identified through a number of UN Environmental Assembly resolutions. Most recently, resolution on lake restoration, promoted by the government of Indonesia. The WWQA position paper is a rallying call for the world's governments to protect and, where necessary, restore lakes. It fits with both the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the current UN Decade of Restoration. The position paper proposes 4 key actions necessary to set in motion a new and ambitious agenda for the restoration and protection of lakes and reservoirs.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Caral Plana and I'm working as a researcher at Eurecat at the Water, Air and Soil Unit. Today I would like to talk to you about water, the impact of climate change on this resource, and how we can adapt our water systems to this impact. As you know, water is essential for life and is a finite resource. Climate change is making this resource even more scarce. For instance, drought periods are becoming more common and more severe, and floods are more devastating. This means that we need to be more mindful of how we use water, and we need to conserve water and use it more efficiently. We also need to find new ways to reuse water and recycle wastewater. To clarify a little bit, water reuse is the process of treating wastewater so that it can be used again for a variety of purposes, such as irrigation, industrial processes, and even drinking water. Water reuse is becoming increasingly important as we face scarcity and climate change. There are already a number of different water treatment technologies on the market that can be used to recycle wastewater. For example, membrane filtration, activated sludge, and other advanced oxidation processes. Water treatment technologies can be used to produce water of different qualities depending on the intended use. For example, water that is recycled for irrigation does not need to be as clean as water that is recycled for drinking water. Climate change is having a significant impact on water resources and water quality. It means that climate change is causing more extreme weather events such as droughts and floods, and these events can damage water infrastructures and pollute water supplies. Climate change is also causing sea levels to rise, and this is salinating coastal aquifers and making it more difficult to access fresh water in these areas. In order to mitigate the impacts of climate change on water resources, we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and invest in adaptation measures. Adaptation measures can include developing more resilient water infrastructures, improving water management practices, and increasing water storage capacity. We can also support policies that promote water reuse and water efficiency. As you know, and as I mentioned before, water is essential for life and for a sustainable future. We need to work together to protect our water resources and ensure that everyone has access to clean water. Thank you for your time.
So with the SDG targets, we made major contribution to the different goals and the agendas of the SDGs. With the 6th National Report for the Convention on Biodiversity, if I was not proactive and brought all the local groups together with the consultant to hear their stories, we would have been left out. This led to the consultant going to the sites, seeing what they do, their activities, how they manage their activities. And so we were able to have our data, our voices reflected in the national reports. So what I am pushing for in data management and collection is inclusive and participatory processes. We just went through a tropical storm with Tropical Storm Philip. And you know the first responders are the people on the ground, the neighbors, the communities coming together to offer assistance to each other. Is this type of data reflected in our global processes where our governments receive aid for responses, restoration? Does the data show our activity that resources can come to the bottom where the people are working? So my appeal, my call through this medium is that it requires an all of society approach. Everyone must be included in the data processes, especially the people who many times we see as marginalized, vulnerable, but we have strengths, we have a voice, and we want to have a voice in data management processes. Thank you very much.
Hi, I am Silvia Frias. I am biologist, specialized in oceanography and marine environmental management. And currently, I'm a researcher at the Climate Change Department of EURECAT and the Climate Resilience Center, where we are working on different national and international projects to develop scientific solutions for ecosystem restoration and mitigation and adaptation to climate change. Protecting and restoring ecosystems is crucial for the health of our planet and the well-being of both nature and people. And protection and restoration solutions have multiple benefits at an environmental, social, and economic level. On the one hand, these solutions help to preserve biodiversity and enhance important ecosystem services such as food provision, resilience to natural disasters, or water quality. So, for example, restoring wetlands or forests, which play a key role in filtering and regulating water, contributes to improving water quality and reducing the risk of floods and droughts, and at the same time contribute to climate change mitigation, sequestering carbon and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. On the other hand, such solutions support people's well-being and health and provide jobs and business opportunities contributing to local economies. So, in this context, it's very important to think about how these solutions can become into tangible benefits and generate a real impact on the society. That is why we are implementing the Living Lab methodology in the restoration projects to involve local stakeholders from the beginning in the planning and design of these kind of projects, which is essential to develop effective solutions and the full delivery of their multiple benefits and to ensure their social acceptance and scaling up. So it's not only necessary to develop innovative approaches to generate and share scientific knowledge that improve citizens' understanding and promote their participation, but also to facilitate capacity building, co-design, and policy making. Furthermore, ecosystem restoration faces several barriers that we are working on. For example, assessing the effectiveness of restoration projects can be challenging, especially in the long term, because it requires continuous monitoring, which means a lot of time and resources. Additionally, many of these restoration efforts depend on public funds and grants, which they don't provide a stable long-term funding to sustain the projects and their solutions over the time. So to sum up, you can see that data to action, which is the focus of this panel, addresses so many important challenges that I propose to discuss together in this session. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for these very insightful presentations. Looking forward to the discussions now. We're unfortunately have to inform you that Ruth is unable to join you at this point. We'll see if we can bring her in later into this discussion, but I'm happy to have seen her input and presentation. For those who had listened in the first part, you will have seen that where a lot of focus was on the sort of the part from from data generation, how to make sure we collect the right data, process the data, have access to data, the methodologies, as well as sort of the access to the data, and then the communication of the data and generation of information. And we've seen now that, well, we did talk about as well, of course, the aspect of knowledge and knowledge sharing and towards action, but we've seen in a lot of these presentations right now already sort of the next step. Information is there, data is there. How do we make sure now that the knowledge that is generated can lead to solutions that help the society at a large, or the communities it tries to help? And I've just picked up a few points from the different presentations, which I think already speak directly to that question. I mean, we've heard from Brian the presentation of the position paper, or the white paper, by the workstream of the World Water Quality Alliance, which is obviously a very strong policy document with clear actions required to make sure we enhance or improve lakes. And here, obviously, the next question would be, how do we assure that we move from a policy document to actually push this further into action and into the arena? We've shared, I've been in the session live when this white paper was launched at the Water Conference. I don't think we will get a much higher agenda or higher level presentation of such a paper in sort of the global context. But beyond that, we need to make sure that it is also the practitioners, it goes to the local and to the different levels of governance and policy to take up these recommendations that are brought forward. And I think we want to talk about there, sort of what are the next steps. What I find was very interesting was the aspects that Ruth mentioned on the engagement of the communities within these processes at all levels, basically, and whether that is actually reflected in the global processes, or the requirement of engaging communities at all levels, and how that is reflected in our global processes. I think Ruth has a lot of experience participating in these international and global conferences, and might see the challenge that we often have in really making sure the communities, the local communities, indigenous peoples, etc., are engaged and included inclusively in these processes, which ultimately then brings up the question, I think that was also mentioned at the end, knowledge is not enough, which is a bit like before we had data is not enough. If we don't know how to use the data, if we don't know whether the data is good or bad, knowledge doesn't necessarily lead to anything. And we all know that from behavioral science. Just because we know flying is bad doesn't stop people from flying, us included. And so the question, therefore, is also knowledge on what needs to be done is oftentimes available, but it lacks capacity, it lacks resources, it lacks commitment. And I think that's something I would like to talk about here as well. How do we make sure that we develop the capacity on implementing the knowledge and the information in the solutions and generating sort of the drive towards that? And I would like to start off probably going back to the last presentation with Sylvia on that point. You made the statement, knowledge is not enough and capacity development is very critical. And I'd like to hear from you, what do you do actually within your work to make sure that the knowledge that is generated is that the people that need to receive that knowledge or that have that knowledge are capacitated to actually implement and follow through, and what process work and what process probably do not work, or where do you need support in that work?
Thank you very much, Melchior. Like I was saying in the video, we are implementing a methodology for developing and designing the projects. We are trying because it's not easy. So we are in the process to implementing the living lab methodology. And in fact, here in Ebro Delta region, we have a living lab physical space that is called Living Lab, Ebro Delta Living Lab. And we are trying to first to detect and involve the stakeholders that are involved in the projects or the solutions that we want to develop. And after that, trying to involve the knowledge and their needs and priorities and at the same time to involve them in, or to engage them to participate in the projects from the beginning. So it's a kind of previous process, and as well as during the planning and the design, we are trying to co-design and co-plan with the different stakeholders these projects or these scientific solutions. And it's not easy because there are some conflicts, economic and social conflicts, and different priorities and interests, and not always there are social acceptance, or they are not understanding really well what different parts want to make, or to try to benefit from that kind of projects. And we are trying that it's not easy, but that it's not like from the science to the people, no, or the society, to try to look for a bottom-up process. But it's not easy because, for example, the funds, when we apply for the European or national funding, you have to describe your ideas, no, your scientific ideas, on where you apply for funding for developing projects. You don't include in these projects like partners, no, these social agents, like. So it's difficult now to try to involve with this methodology, and at the same time to apply for funds from the scientific community. And we are trying to resolve this kind of situations, to try to work together with these agents, that to try to respond their particular needs, and to find solutions that are from local, for the local communities, and from local communities, not only from the scientific community.
Thank you. I think this is interesting because it builds somehow also on what Natasha said earlier, on the need to co-create the process from starting in the definition of the problem, because that needs to be common understanding, and from there taking it forward upwards along this process. That kind of leads us nicely to the presentation of Keral, where you were talking about obviously the impact of climate change and water, and how they're interlinked. And I think that has become very, very obvious in recent years. And if we look at the global statistics, I believe it's 80 to 90% of all environmental disasters caused by climate change are related to the water cycle in one way or another, through droughts and floods, etc. So that has been acknowledged also within the framework of the I think the climate discussions, as well as the general discussions on sustainable development agenda. But the question here I would have for you is, you talked about how it's important. No, my notes are here. That you talked about these different best practices in water reuse and efficiency, and communicating these. And there's two aspects I see, and I would be curious to see how what your position is on that. One, yes, we do know a lot about best practices. I think we are not short of best practices in terms of water reuse and recycling, etc. However, oftentimes there are social barriers to acceptance of some of these best practices. And that goes back to the issue of, like, are we solving the problem of the people, or are we solving our problem? And so what do you do to make sure that the solutions that are proposed, or the actions that are proposed, or the best practices are actually accepted, socially accepted? We have a lot of examples in Africa, for example, where solutions were brought that were not culturally accepted in a way they were designed, etc. So I believe it goes back to the question of how do we define the problem and how do we approach the process. But from your experience and from your work, how do you make sure that the solutions that you come up with and that you propose are actually socially accepted? And then what tools do you use to actually communicate and share that and make this knowledge available?
Totally. I fully agree with what Sylvia was saying, and also what it was said on the previous session. I think the key factor here is to build up trust. If we share properly our knowledge, we can achieve social acceptance. Passing to building this trust when people accept it, or knowing what we can offer, the quality of the water, the impact that can affect human health, plus the environment, the impact on the environment, and sharing this knowledge with the right wording, of course, because when we talk about when we talk in scientific terms, people stop listening and people don't assimilate what we are trying to share with the people. So here we need to find a proper way to transfer all this knowledge and build trust together with the society and administration, which is co-creational together according to the needs identified and the problem identified previously. As it was mentioned also, the quintuple helix term, which integrates all the sectors in the society, from the scientific community, government, citizens, and so on. So here we need to work all together and try to speak the same language. That's what we should try to do as scientists, to reach the citizens in order to present the best practices that and defend that there's a benefit of implementing these best practices and how citizens can get or perceive these benefits.
All right, thank you, Carol. Now I would like to go to Brian and probably come back to my question that I'd sort of posed earlier as a reflection. You've done a lot of great work involving a large community to make sure that the guidance or the actions that you propose are really reflecting collective intelligence and knowledge on lakes restoration and sustainable lake management. What is next? I mean, we have, and that's obviously a big question, like we have now a policy document, and what are you planning, or what is the community planning in making sure that there are next steps and it doesn't stop at, okay, we have done our part, we are the scientists, or is that the end? What do you see as your agency as a researcher or as a community of experts? What do you see as your role in taking this forward, or do you see a role for yourself and for your community in taking this forward? Because the question always is also, what is the role of science? Where does it start and where does it stop? And where do we now say it's someone else who needs to take this further? And so do you feel like you've done your part, or is there something else that you feel you can do to support now actual implementation and take up of these recommendations and actions?
Thanks, Melchior. I think as a scientist, if I start from there, I've got two hats that I wear. So I'm a scientist first and foremost. That's what I get paid to do. So that's to produce scientific evidence that helps us understand the natural world better and the impacts of human beings on the natural world. That's the first hat, and that's my main hat. But the second hat that you're referring to, I think, is in our work with the World Water Quality Alliance and trying to encourage and raise awareness on the benefits of sustainable lake management. So I'll talk about both of those hats, I think. To start with, yeah, I mean, the provision of evidence never ends, right? That's the scientific process. There's always more evidence that is required so that we can increase our confidence on how we address the changing natural world. Climate change is, of course, a major challenge for us and scientifically. Trying to disentangle the effects of climate change on lakes, for example, is a really complicated process. And some people might say, well, easy, isn't it? The lakes might get warmer and they might get drier. Well, it's not that easy. And the effects of climate change can be manifest within seasons and across different organism types and across different lake types in different regions of the world. And all of that has to come together to allow us to sort of chart a path scientifically with regards to how the natural environment is going to change and what we can do to adapt or mitigate to that change. And I think the policy process is well entrained with regards to climate change mitigation and adaptation, for example, through the national adaptation plans, but there's a lot of fragmentation. So, for example, tree planting. In Kenya, I saw there was a national holiday for tree planting recently. Melky, I'm not sure if you're in Nairobi just now, but I noticed that in the news, and that's an excellent initiative. But are those initiatives being considered, for example, in the way that Sylvia presented it earlier, with regards to controlling of flooding, nutrient uptake and management, protection of receiving ecosystems, that more holistic view? And so that's something that I think the scientific community can work to try and progress over the next few years. Just one example. My second hat in terms of the World Water Quality Alliance, what comes next? So you were right, presenting that white paper at the UN Water Conference was brilliant. And one of the other key initiatives recently is the United Nations Environment Assembly resolution on sustainable lake management. So I think momentum on lakes is building. And it's a logical question by the scientific community and others to say, well, we've known about these problems for decades, why haven't we done anything? And I think that's what the white paper sets out to address, is that question, why haven't we done anything? And our conclusion was to do with the fragmentation of the policies, of the bodies, of the people who are responsible or who feel accountable to implement change on lakes. I think that's still the case, but there are green shoots of progress there, and we discussed those at the World Lakes Conference in Hungary last week. And certainly, from a scientific perspective, there's a lack of uptake of scientific evidence in the practitioner community, and I can expand on that. This isn't a criticism of the practitioner community; they do excellent work. But equally, there's a lack of scientific evidence in policy development. And just a final thought on this, Melchior. Sylvia's presentation was brilliant. It really echoed what we say in the white paper. There are multiple benefits to be gained from the restoration of the natural environment, but I don't think we focus on that. I think the drivers of restoration are too narrow, they're too siloed in their approach, and only when we widen out that lens on the multiple benefits of restoration will we really start to accelerate uptake in that area.
Great, thank you so much, Brian. I think all very good points, and also coming back, doing the loop to Sylvia's presentation, because at the end of the day, the question is what inhibits us from implementing and from doing what we know is right, and what are the drivers behind that, and what are the barriers. And so I think that's something that we have great people here to discuss a little bit more, sort of multiple benefits of interventions. I mean, this is what UNEP has been preaching over decades. That's our bread and butter. But clearly, it's not still common knowledge, and it's not common understood. And we've talked about the whole concept of sort of environmental accounting, ecosystems accounting, to kind of attract the financial domain in buying into why it's important. But it's not only that. I mean, there's multiple levels, and I would like to kind of throw this back to you, probably Sylvia, in that regard. What do you see are the key challenges in making those people who can drive decisions or who can push actions understand these multiple benefits and therefore prioritize what we know is right? And it has multiple layers and levels of complexities. But if you have some thoughts on that, please do share.
Yeah, I agree with you, because there are multiple levels of to approach these kind of projects. But I think that we have, for a real involvement of the society who is receiving the multiple benefits of these interventions, at the same time the nature and the society, we have to think about different innovative approaches or methodologies or techniques or tools to make the knowledge or the scientific outputs, like, for example, this policy document, or the white paper that we can share in a congress, a scientific congress, or policy makers and so on. But we have to try to transform this information and to make more accessible and understanding for the society to empower them, or different stakeholders, to empower them with this knowledge. Not only like they see the science like, okay, the experts that say what to do, what is the best option for implementing a restoration project, for example. And it's like a top-down situation, no? And it's difficult because they are not working in different scientific results, or they are not doing research on daily life. They are other knowledge. So we have to speak, like Gerald says, to speak the same language. So they have to provide us with the knowledge about, for example, farmers, fishers, or local stakeholders, or business, or local communities. And also we have to provide this knowledge, the results of our research, in a way that they understand this information and empower them to make solutions from there, to participate, to make these solutions, to solve these problems, to empower them, like, for example, creating new opportunities, business ideas, or something like this, to solve these problems, not only from the scientific community, to try to empower them to understand what is happening and to provide solutions from them also, and participate in an active way. I think that it's the first step, and we have to continue. But we need to communicate each other in the same language, because now we are in a process that we are not understanding. So we are not incorporating all the knowledge, all the ideas from the society and from the scientific community.
Interesting. That kind of also reflects the reality in terms of data. When we talked earlier about we have a lot of information and data that is not necessarily compatible, and therefore we are unable to get a comprehensive overview of the actual data. It seems this lack of common baseline, whether it's on the metadata, on the interoperability of data, similar, it kind of also reflects our realities then at the social level, where we seem to be unable to communicate in the same language about the same problem, and therefore creating barriers and actually driving process there, and creating issues where probably if we were having a similar or the same language, we would be able to come together easier. On that general subject, anyone else wants to contribute?
Yeah, I can. I think from a lake perspective, and lake restoration, lake management, we're quite comfortable, I think, with the idea of, I think the terminology in UNIT's local water forum, but where I come from, it's catchment management groups. And so you've got lots of different voices, all with their own sort of vision on what restoration means to them, depending on how they use the environment that's been restored. And I think that's both a blessing and a challenge, because it gives you buy-in from those people who, their volunteer hours and their activities in raising funding for restoration is essential in getting restoration projects off the ground, but also a challenge because it's unlikely that you can please everybody. And so I think getting that balance in the benefits, this is again where, going back to Sylvia's point, understanding the benefits of restoration is different from understanding the causes of restoration, and you need different forms of information and evidence and data to allow you to try and balance that. And I think that brings out the concept of equity in the return on investment in restoration. And I think that's no more emotive when we think about indigenous peoples, where large public investment has been put in for restoration. And some members of the local water forum might ask, well, what's in it for me? What are the benefits that are going to be drawn down to different areas of the community? How long will they last? When will we receive them? And I think that side of restoration is sort of less well developed, and certainly a lot of the drivers in restoration that I'm familiar with tend to be policy or directives, for example in Europe, that are set by ecological targets or water quality targets, and don't necessarily consider those wider benefits on the community. So as I said, it's both a blessing but also a challenge to have those diverse communities in the room. They need to be there. That's just a perspective, I think, from my experiences of providing evidence to those sorts of groups.
Great. I had a question here on my paper, which I believe is a bit superfluous now, because from what I've heard so far, you all seem very aligned on the idea of sort of a bottom-up engagement and approach. And you mentioned Brian, you mentioned the local water forums that are supported and endorsed by the World Water Quality Alliance. The question was around citizen science and what role do you see for citizen science as researchers? Are there valuable contributors to your efforts and your work as scientists and researchers, or are there, how are they perceived? And we can go back to that. Just an example of, in that context, these water forums that you're talking about are in a way sometimes a bit random and not necessarily institutionalized. We do have, for example, in Kenya, where UNEP is based and where I've been working, and I've been working particularly on that professionally as well in the past, what we call the Water Resources Users Associations, which are reflected in the Water Act and are mandated to support water resources management at the local level and through the Ministry of Water and the Water Authority, and are supposed to be supported in its conceptualization or in its build-up and structure through the Water Authority. And this is really the idea, I think, and it speaks to what we discussed earlier, sort of a bottom-up, but also a local level-led problem identification, because the idea is these water resources use associations are established at the level of a sub-catchment. You talked about catchment management groups or whatever, and the sub-catchments. So you have the different broader water catchments, and you have the sub-basins or sub-catchments, and at that levels, you have then these associations that are established as formal associations registered here with the Attorney General, and comprising of local communities, but also industries, businesses, local governance, like governments and governance levels, basically all stakeholders that have a stake in water. And the idea here really is, and this is something that we've been trying to support in my previous job in other organizations, is really to empower those communities to collect information, collect data, so that they do not rely on receiving data from the government, which oftentimes doesn't have data at that level, but also can meaningfully contribute and therefore also understand what the real challenges are and help identifying those. And the key activities of these water resource users associations is the development of a sub-catchment basin management plan, which basically clearly identifies all the challenges in this sub-catchment and then develops proposals for actions. And this is then taken for fundraising within and outside government and stakeholders and whatever. And I think that's an interesting example of how such a bottom-up process to local engagement and management of natural resources has been institutionalized through the government, through the Water Act, through legislation. It isn't working perfectly, but I think it is a very interesting example of how this local level engagement driving also policy action at the end, because these local sub-catchment basin management plan feed into the larger basin management plan by the governments, etc., and therefore directly correspond with the priority setting of the government and resource allocations, etc. And just throwing this in there as an example, and I know these also exist in Tanzania, and it's a very interesting model and concept institutionalized through the government. But again, so throwing it back to you, what is your idea of citizen science, citizen engagement? Because it's not only collecting data. From our perspective, working with them in SDG 632, where we are trying on ambient water quality, where we're trying to support governments in using citizen science to collect data that otherwise they wouldn't be able to collect. It is really also then to foster action, because once the citizens become aware of the actual problems and how they can be tackled, they will also be better inclined to support actions on the ground and be involved in this. So that's our perspective and sort of the framework that we use, or the theory of change that we apply in and why we think it's very critical and important to engage them. But we come from a global environmental policy sort of level. From a research science perspective, on the ground, what's your take on this? Carol, probably I'll throw this out to you. I don't know if you've had any experience working with citizen science, or in general what your perspective is on that from your work.
I was trying to process all your thoughts. Of course, we need to integrate social science on our projects. If we can engage citizens in our projects to get data, more reliable will be the data. So more benefit we can take from the data, and even better solutions we can offer to the society to adapt the society to new challenges. So it's a loop that we have to all collaborate together in order to get a proper solutions for everyone. And from the scientist perspective, we can bring knowledge, and from citizens' perspective, they can bring needs, raise the needs that they have, plus information. And as scientists, with the information, we can find solutions. So it's a wheel that never stops. That's my perspective, and it's a key factor on implementing the solutions that we are developing.
Thanks.
Regarding your question about citizen science or citizen science projects, I think that it's important because now we are talking about collecting data, multiple amounts of data that, for example, using other methodologies would be not possible. And to mobilize people to collect data, it's a good technique to get more data, to the compilation of data. But I think that also in these kind of projects, and not always it's like that, there's a component of, an important component of education. So it has to be like a bidirectional process from the scientific community and the citizens. And they, for example, participate in collecting data, but they have to understand why they are collecting this data and which is the impact of their participation in collecting this data, for example. And also they have to be able to understand the results that provide from this data. So it's a continuous process that sometimes in some projects, it's like only in the beginning, in the collection of the data or monitoring, for example, identifying the different species, or there are projects that maybe are focused on the beginning, and the citizen science implies that the citizens understand what they are providing, and it's like a collaborative way to do research. So sometimes I have doubts about some projects or initiatives that they are not real bidirectional, they don't, and people don't understand maybe the outputs, the final outputs of that project. And I think that it's very important in this kind of initiatives to generate a real impact.
Mm-hmm.
I
don't. What's your opinion about this?
I would like to add something. Yeah. I second what Sylvia was saying, and this brings to involve citizens in our projects, to make them being part of the projects in order to be helpful on our developments. So I think here the engagement, it becomes on involving directly them, to making them being part of our research or investigations.
Yeah, and interestingly, it always has to be a two-way street. Otherwise, we are losing people. If someone just generates data but doesn't know what happens with the data, then there's a good chance that this data is not of very good quality, or I've the experience working here with the local with the water authority in a regional office, and it's very hierarchical. You have at the sub-regional office, you collect data, which then feeds into the regional offices. There they are being accumulated and put together and somewhat sort of quality assured, if you may want so, and then fed into the national headquarters, and there they're analyzed. But the people at the lowest level have no idea what happens to the data. There's no report that the authority sends back to the people to make them understand what happened with your data or what is your data being used for. And therefore, there's zero ownership. And if there's no ownership, then someday they wake up and say, okay, instead of going out and monitoring the gauging station, we just write it down because nobody cares. And I think that's a good example of how it's important that along this whole value chain of this generation of information and knowledge, there needs to be ownership, and from top to bottom, from bottom to top, both ways. And I think that's a critical component as a quick reaction to that. But I know Brian also wanted to reflect on that.
Yeah, Melchior. I mean, I think the panel have really covered most of the topics on citizen science. I think it's really a really valuable evidence source. A couple of examples I can draw on. I know that the team for the Sustainable Development Goal 6, for example, 632 in particular, in reporting on lakes. So there's over 100 million lakes in the world, and a fraction of those were reported on in SDG 632. And so there's a big drive on to try and increase reporting on the status of the world's lakes, and citizen science plays a really key role in that. And the team are doing a brilliant job at SDG 6. And they are, they're properly going through, trying to think about capacity development, making sure the information that's going down to the guys on the ground is going to be useful and produce data that's of a high enough standard and quality that can be reported on in this way. And feedback, I think, is critical in that process, both in terms of improving the quality of the data that's produced, but also, what was the data used for, what impact did it have, what was the reward, if you like, for those citizen scientists. I think that's one side of it, is just what's the state of the environment in terms of the evidence that comes through. But I think what we're seeing more and more now is citizens restorers, if you like, or people who are going out, local action groups who are going out and taking it upon themselves to restore the environment that they can see is impacted. I had a conversation with a colleague in India who was responsible for coordinating youth action groups across over 70 lake restoration projects last week. And her frustration was that these action groups are in place, youth action groups are in place, the momentum is there, but the longevity, the commitment of those groups is fairly short term, maybe 3 years or so. And that's because they're not seeing an impact. They can go in and do some work, but they're not witnessing a long-term impact. Their efforts are not necessarily bearing fruit over the long term. And I think putting in place initiatives that allow us to help those teams collect new data on restoration and its effectiveness would really feed back into that system, which isn't necessarily done at the moment through those schemes. So I think thinking from a citizen's contribution perspective, from citizen scientists who may monitor the state of the natural environment, as well as citizens practitioners or citizens restoration teams who are actively going out and trying to improve it, and making sure they've got the evidence base to allow them to do that effectively and over the long term is, I think, critical in feeding that system, making sure it's going to continue, if you like. So we've got a job to do, I think, as scientists, to try and produce the capacity development material that supports that activity.
I know that you're working on capacity development also for the lakes, work on the lakes, and I think that's a very good point. Right. And I fully concur also that I feel like we can't, on the other hand, we can't leave restoration projects and river cleanups, etc., to the youth groups, or there needs to be more to that. And I think it's these cleanup campaigns are important to create awareness, but they're not sustainable. We will not solve the problem by having a cleanup day every year or having a tree planting day every year, which curiously enough, coincided with the president meeting delegation from the IMF and World Bank discussing the next loan, which was conditional on enhancing their restoration and efforts on climate change mitigation, including planting trees. And on the same day, a declaration was made. For the same day, a declaration was made that there's a public holiday in Kenya and everybody is requested to plant trees, while the president meets the delegation from the World Bank and IMF to discuss the conditionality of the loan. Certainly some interesting coincidence, if you may say so. Anyway, there needs to be more efforts to I think, institutionalize, but also provide the enabling environment and framework for the long-term sustainability of these efforts. And I think we've seen in previous panels great examples from the local water forums that you had also mentioned, and the initiatives, cleanup initiatives by Com Green, etc. But all of those, they need support. They cannot just indefinitely run on the goodwill and interest of the citizens and communities to live in a clean environment. There needs to be more to that. We do have 15 minutes left, less than 15 minutes left. I don't know if I'm in the right chat, but I haven't seen any questions coming in from the audience. I'm not sure if you have seen any, but so far none. If there are any questions still among anyone who's listening in, please do share. We would welcome that very much. Otherwise, we will just continue our friendly chat here, if you don't mind. Going a little bit back to the theme of the conference in itself, it's really, Cassandra, is about the effects of climate change on issues such as migration, gender equality, health, and even potential conflicts. And so probably trying to look at a bigger picture. To what extent does the work that you do as a scientist, as researchers with your projects, possibly contribute to combating these socio-political, economic, environmental crises, and what do you see as your role or as your ability to, or impact on that, say? Because we've been very much water focused, but trying to bring this to a bit of a higher level. But curious to see whether you see impact there, or you see your work contributing to that at a higher socio-political scale. Anyone wants to start on that?
Yeah, I could take a go at that, Melchior, if that's okay.
Sure.
Our colleagues at the Joint Research Centre in Europe conducted a survey of the community practice on lakes, and that confirmed, over 63 countries that reached, that confirmed that one of the main stressors of lake degradation was nutrient pollution from agriculture and wastewater. And that sort of lifts the lid on a global socio-political challenge in terms of fertilizer use, nutrient recovery, the sort of circularity of nutrient use in the environment. So one of the major impacts of losses of nutrients through agriculture and wastewater is nutrient pollution of receiving water bodies, whether they be on the coasts or inland waters, fresh water. So the terms eutrophication, but effectively biodiversity loss, and harmful algal blooms, all these sorts of effects, of which we're all very familiar with. But the driver of that is unsustainable use of nutrients, and getting a handle on that problem is really challenging. I mean, that's a high level geopolitical issue that goes straight back to the mine. Who owns the resource? What are the politics behind that? What is the industry regulation that underlies that? And going through the whole value chain, through at the national scale, is your country a producer, or an exporter or an importer of fertilizers, for example? And I can tell you most countries in the world are importers of fertilizers, which leaves them exposed to a really volatile market in terms of price spikes, etc. And so there's all sorts of drivers for nations to try and sustainably manage the nutrients that they use within their food system. And going through that process, the evidence that we can produce as scientists identify the leak points in that economy, if you like, in the nutrient cycles, to try and address and reduce nutrient pollution to water bodies, which is where my main work comes in. But thinking about the evidence that lies behind that is absolutely a global geopolitical issue at its roots. But there's no real solution to that at the moment. For phosphorus, for example, one of the main nutrients, there's certainly ambitions towards that, and nitrogen has had more success in pushing together international initiatives on sustainable nitrogen management, but not really to the same extent that carbon, another major nutrient that affects us, has. So this issue of climate change, whether our work addresses or at least provides evidence to address some of these large-scale societal issues, yes, it does, but there are barriers in place even when the evidence is there. And I think that requires, these large-scale issues require the sorts of initiatives that we're seeing on plastics in Nairobi at the moment, and that's a long-term challenge, I think, for some of these major stressors that our freshwater and marine ecosystems are seeing.
Thanks. Anyone else who wants to chip in here on this?
I can mention something. I would focus first on water availability. Due to climate change, water resource is quite limited. So with our research, what we can help is on a proper management on the water to let everyone have enough water for the basic needs. Then we can go then a step further on the quality, but I think that the first step is try to distribute and manage the water to reach everyone, because there are some parts of the world that they don't have enough water for the basic needs. So we can try to provide enough knowledge on that sense. And then we can also provide the knowledge in terms of treating the water to provide clean water at a worldwide level.
No pressure. I wasn't sure whether you want to come in or not on this. If you do want, it's okay. Otherwise, we can probably proceed. Let me know.
Yeah, regarding the intervention of Brian, it's true that it's really complicated because we are now focusing on the scientific or technological solutions to solve the big problems, no? That it's the main topic of the conference. But if the problems continue, like Brian exposes, no, like if we are creating the kind of nutrient pollution on other type of pollutions, and in parallel we could create or design some solutions for that problem, but we are continuing perpetuating this problem, it's really complicated. So maybe we have to think, to act, and it's not easy, but to different approaches, no? Not only find solutions for that kind of problems, also which actions we can do from the local communities and from the scientific community and the political perspective also, which kind of activities or actions we can do to try to avoid the problem or to try to mitigate the problem, or to try not continue like always, no? It happens the same with climate change, no? The big problem, the global problem for all of us, no? That if to find an holistic approach to include all the problems derived or the impacts derived from the climate change, but at the same time not only trying to do the same things like always and to sustain the same problems like always and try to solutions to mitigate that kind of problems. It's important to think about how we can change the for example the socioeconomic model, or how we can empower the local communities to decide, for example, the water management, not only from a top perspective, no? To try to approach and to solve these problems, not to continue and perpetuating same things, and at the same time trying to find solutions in eternal problems. And what is your vision about this? And or you have some ideas that we can change to mitigate this?
Good, thank you. I think we've covered a lot. This has been a very long session if you look at the two parts together. I haven't seen any. Okay, now there's actually something that has just come in from Sumita, who has also asked the question previously. It's very long. I haven't read it. I could just read it out, though we don't have much time left. To the points made by Brian and Melchior, one aspect to note is that there may have been promises made in the past about improving the environment or water quality, which were never met or failed due to many reasons. So now the youth have learned not to wait for long and instead move on to the next project. Also, with poor environmental conditions, there are aspirations to move to places with better facilities, water supply or sanitation, and with more scope for economic upliftment. Just a few thoughts and observations. Question to the panel: in the instances where the local stakeholders have given up on having any expectation or hope for recovering or managing the surface water and have accepted that they should just live with a poor environmental situation, how would you initiate the initial buy-in to the solution generating process? And what would be your process of managing expectations and informing them about unexpected failures? This is indeed a very long question, and it comes at a very late point in time of this session. I'm not sure if we'll have time for a round among all of us to respond or reflect on that. I'm not sure if anyone has a short, immediate reaction to that. We certainly do not have time for a long, extensive discourse on that. But Brian, I see your mic is open. You can reflect on or respond to that briefly, and then we'll close this session.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point, and it's exactly the point that I was trying to make earlier on experiences of my colleagues in India. I think the solution here is engaging with the restoration community early on through capacity development activities. And my colleagues at IHE Delft, who were involved in the World Water Quality Alliance white paper, are developing those materials that are focused at practitioners that will be rolled out, I think, first of all, in some countries in South America, to try and co-develop those. So I think that will provide a sort of educational background to as a benefit. Other examples are the Society of Ecological Restoration, who engage with groups really effectively, and those groups, have an educational benefit out of it, things that they can put on their CV that help them through employment, for example. So there are other benefits to be gained through engagement, and I think that's really important for us to get on board with. But ultimately, we want these groups of people to be restoring the environment effectively, and making sure they've got the right knowledge at their fingertips is probably the primary focus at the moment.
Thanks for that very concise, brief response or reaction to that. We would have gone into that in a bit more detail if we had more time, but I do not wish to extend this session beyond the 2.5 hours that is already scheduled, and I will not attempt to summarize the entire discussions at 6:30 on my side. I don't think I have the brain capacity to do that at this point in time, but I do want to appreciate all the inputs and the speakers of the two different panels, and specifically you now for the second part. I do think that we did discuss vital points within this continuum from data to action through the process of generating information and knowledge. And I hope that it has been enlightening to some of the participants or the visitors or participants of the conference. I certainly learned quite a lot from all of you. I think it has been a very good discussion between us. I hope next time there'll be more questions, probably earlier at some point of the discussion. But yeah, I hope this was worth your while. You found this interesting, and can take some things with you from this discussion and take them on for your work. I believe that if there are particular follow-up questions to any of the panelists, the contact and information is on the website, and you can reach out to anyone with particular questions afterwards. I apologize for the absence of Ruth. I'm not quite sure what happened, but it was beyond our control. And with that, I would like to close the second part and in general, the full panel 7, and appreciate your engagement and your inputs, and wish you all a good afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much.